what do we mean when we talk about science? And we're really looking at the gaps and the opportunities and the emerging areas, and really kind of translation between what's happening in the textile world and what's happening in the environmental world, and bringing those two areas together. So what we're really trying to do through both this pre-event webinar and also actually in the event, in the summit, is look at where we can actually bring those together and really look at new areas of research that need to be undertaken in order that we can make the biggest impact. So we'll be following the same format that we did in our first webinar, which was measurement. And I will be firstly introducing the summit very briefly, and then our panel of 3 speakers who will be joining me today. And then we'll be asking questions to the panel and then back to you, the participants. So really what we're trying to do here, and also with the summit, is ensure that we can actually populate collectively a cross-industry impact roadmap to help us all work towards this aligned agenda and make the greatest impact we possibly can. So that's the intent of today, and we've got Lisa and Trudy that will be supporting with regards to gathering your comments and questions in the chat function. So we do encourage you to add your questions in and make sure we can hear what you're saying. Okay, so I'm going to jump in now and talk a little bit about the summit. So the summit is going to be running over 3 part days between March 23rd, and we have a wrap-up session on April the 1st. So really what we were intending to do here is have a bite-sized sections covering different topics on different days. So we're not taking up a huge chunk of time now that we're all working in this virtual way that we're having to today. The summit, as I said before, is really to address how we can come together as a cross-industry to populate and commit against a cross-industry action roadmap. And that's really what the key outputs of this forum are going to be. I do actually want to bring up, because the questions come up a few times, around summit versus conference, and I really do want to stress that it is a summit rather than a conference. We're not going to be having back-to-back presentations. We're really making sure that it's an interactive forum, and there's going to be a lot of dialogues. There's going to be panel conversations, there's going to be roundtables, breakouts where we can really delve deeply into the conversation, bringing in industry experts to help us accelerate the agenda here. So as far as the 3 topic areas, the first webinar that we had in December was around measurement, and that was really where we were talking about test methodology and policy, and how that really becomes the groundwork for the research and also product development against this topic. So a great forum that we had there. We've got some really great feedback from the participants that were on the call. So today we're talking about science, and this is where we're bringing together the textile research with the environmental research. We've got 3 great panelists that I'll be introducing in a minute. And then finally in February, we're going to be rounding up our pre-event webinars with a product development webinar where we'll be talking about innovation, technology and manufacture. So what you can expect from today is not necessarily the depth of content that we'll be providing at the summit, but a really kind of a teaser of what's to come and an opportunity to put your thoughts forward to make sure that we can get to a really robust conversation actually in the event. So I'm just going to admit some more people that are coming through, and then we'll get on to introductions to the panel today. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our 3 panel speakers. So maybe you can just wave as I introduce you, and then we can pass over to you so people know who you are. So we've got Sandra Roos first from Kappahl, heading up the sustainability work at Kappahl. And I think just to give people some context, Sandra was previously with Sphera and started this work many years ago. So I'm really excited to have Sandra join us today and help bring together that kind of research background with the way that a brand or retailer would use that information today. Secondly, we've got Alice Davies from the University of Leeds. Alice has been working with us for just over a year now as a research technician, working very closely with TMC, and is doing all the deep and dirty kind of research work in the lab. Alice is also just about to start a PhD with us to continue this work over the next 3 years. So we're very excited to have that continuation with Alice there. And then finally, we've got Andy Booth, one of our research members with SINTEF, and Andy brings into the conversation today the angle from the environmental level. So what I'm going to do at this point is pass over to Sandra and ask her to introduce herself in a little bit more detail and give some background to her organisation and her work. So thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, my name is Sandra Roos. I've been head of sustainability at Kappahl since August. And as Sophie said, I was previously a researcher in the microplastics area, but with focus on chemicals and life cycle assessment, which means that I'm interested in quantification, prioritization, and seeing that we can actually work with reducing the impacts in effective ways. Kappahl is a Swedish fashion brand founded in 1953. We are one of the biggest in Sweden. We have stores in 5 countries, and as you see on the map, they are very circulating the Baltic Sea. We have production also in 5 main countries where we have production offices, which are the red ones on the map. So next slide, please. And from the brand perspective, and perhaps also from the life cycle assessment perspective, it's clear that we don't know what drives the impact. So for internal policy development at the brand, and also for policy development legally, we need to know more about what are the drivers. I see so much observations of occurrence. There are many publications on occurrence of microplastics or fiber fragments. But as a matter of fact, if we don't know what is the effect in the environment, we cannot say if this is a problem or not. And the picture to the left shows this publication with the environmental monitoring in the Baltic Sea between 1985 and 2015. And you can see that we have had microplastics in fish tissue, in water, the samples that are saved from 1985. We have had these fragments a long time back. And that's why I wonder what are the effects? If we have had this fragment so long, why haven't we noticed any effects yet? And are they due to the chemicals inside or the chemistry of the fiber? So, or is it the particle effect? So is it the chemistry that is the driver for damage, or is it the particles that are the drivers to damage? That I would like to know. And the right picture is the planetary boundaries. And it's to remind us that we don't have time to be non-scientific. We can't be driven by emotions, such is many times the case with plastics and natural fibers, plastic fibers. People put so much emotion in this. So we need to quantify the damage that is possible, the damage that is probable, caused by fiber fragmentation, whether it's natural fibers or plastic fibers, so that we can give the right priorities and have effective mitigation compared to all the other threats. Thanks.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Alice. As Sophie said, I'm currently a research technician working out of University of Leeds. I've been working on TMC research for about 18 months now. So at Leeds we worked with TMC to develop the TMC test method. So now we have that really consistent, reliable approach to collecting and quantifying fibre fragments using a simulated laundering test. And in our research now, we're applying that method to really an extensive selection of fabrics. So we've worked with TMC members to select and to source those fabrics. And we're looking at fabrics that can really help us get a deeper understanding of what it is that's really influencing fibre fragmentation within the textile. There's lots of connected factors at play in that. So it's not just about fibre composition. We're gathering data about the yarn properties, fabric construction, finishing, everything that we test. because all of these things could be contributing. So we want to better understand which of these factors are having the greatest influence, in order that we can firstly to prioritise, and also to ultimately get to the most suitable solutions, really. Oh, yeah, sorry, that's what I covered off just now. Sorry, Sophie.
No, that's fine, Alice, sorry. Okay, so we'll pass over to Andy here. And you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name's Andy Booth. I am a research manager at SINTEF Ocean, which is one of the SINTEF institutes, and we're based in Norway. And across the whole institutes, or group of institutes, we are one of Europe's largest independent research organisation, and we have many thousands of projects for customers, large and small, industry, public funding, every year. You might want to click, yeah.
This one?
That one's good, yeah, and one more probably. There we are, there's me, hello. So for more than 70 years, we've been very much sort of focused on developing solutions and innovations for society and customers around the world. And we work closely with our customers, clients, partners on a huge range of topics. And as I said, I'm based in SINTEF Ocean, but we work, you can see the diversity here of the different institutes. So we have across the whole SINTEF group a huge range of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary competencies that we can bring together to address particular research challenges, including the one today, which brings where we've collaborated with colleagues in SINTEF Industry, SINTEF Digital and Energy Research as well. Next slide, I think. Yeah, so I just thought I was asked to sort of focus this a little bit on toxicity today, but our microplastic research, and that obviously includes fibres as well as microplastics more broadly, touches upon a lot of the topics that Sandra highlighted. So we do a lot on environmental fate. So this is degradation, transport, persistence in the environment. We also develop techniques for identification and quantification of particles in simple and challenging matrices, and for particles of different sizes, because this is a continuum of particle sizes from the nanoscale up to the macro scale, and we need different techniques. And of course, what's relevant probably most today is toxicity, the impacts or potential impacts. And we're particularly interested in, like Sandra mentioned, what are the physical and chemical properties of microplastics? And when I say plastic, microplastic, I include fibres as a group within that drive toxicity. For example, is its shape, but also what role do plastic associated chemicals have on the toxicity we're observing in certain studies? And crucially, what are the mechanisms that are driving the toxicity? So I think, yeah, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. So that was a really good kind of a very quick overview by all of our three panel speakers. We could have pulled a lot of content into today's conversation, but I want to make sure that we've got enough, that we can delve into in more depth in the summit. So today is really to kind of start the conversation going, and hopefully you'll join us at the summit to kind of get into the depth. So what I want to do at this point is kind of start to delve into some of the areas that we really want to understand a lot more about. So if you think that the summit is looking to pull together across industry to develop and commit against this cross-industry action roadmap, really we want to start to address now what are the kind of emerging areas that we need to be identifying. We want to make sure that this roadmap covers the medium to long-term plus. So we're not talking about necessarily what's happening today, but really positioning ourselves so we're best able to get after the research, the development, the information that we need to gather to make the biggest change in the long term. So I want to start by maybe turning to Alice. I think the first area I really want to look at is the kind of research gaps and opportunities that we have across both areas. And I think there's a lot of kind of juicy, untapped research between the two areas that we can really start to delve into. But I think maybe Alice can bring forward some areas where you identify or see potential gaps in textile research that you would like the summit to address.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's definitely a couple of areas where there's potential for a lot more research. I guess firstly, I would say I think we are still at the point where just more research is needed, and especially from the textiles discipline in particular. I think we know a lot of early research is from more of a marine and environmental perspective, which is absolutely important. But I think we need to keep seeing more of that textiles perspective, because I think that is going to be ultimately really important to get us to solutions. As far as specific gaps in the textile research, I think Sandra and Andy both kind of touched on this, but looking at fibre compositions other than plastic, so not just polyester, I think that's going to be really important to understand the scale of contribution from natural and cellulosic fibres. I think it's fair to say we still don't know the full extent of potential risks there. So I think there's definitely a gap in the research. Another thing, certainly in the research that I've seen so far, a lot of focus has been on the fibre fragmentation at that domestic laundering stage, so during consumer use. I think other routes and sources are less well studied to date, at least, and things like during manufacturing, we know there's massive potential for fibre fragmentation and end of life as well. There is more research coming through on airborne routes as well as water-based, so I think it's going to be really interesting to see more research into these areas, because again, important to understand the scale of the contribution from all these different sources, not just domestic laundering, to really get to a full picture, I guess. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Alice. And I just want to check in with Lisa and Trudy to see if there's any chat coming through. We'd really like to hear your thoughts, although we're addressing the questions to the panel here. Please feel free to shout out and give us any information if you're seeing that there's things additional to this that we can bring into the later conversation. So at that point, I'm going to pass over to Andy and maybe, ask you from an ocean point of view, or even a broader environmental point of view, where you see potential opportunities and gaps in the research from your area.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Alice was saying. But if you're looking to solve a problem in the environment, you're already looking in the wrong place. So if you've got to look back up the value chain, because trying to fix something that's already got into the environment is really, really challenging. Stopping it getting there in the first place is by far the right place to put research efforts. That said, I think Sandra really highlighted an important thing, and something that I'm pushing a lot whenever I get the opportunity, which is a balanced viewpoint. That we don't overreact, we don't allow sort of personal feelings to come into this, but we actually used an evidence-based approach to assessing risk. So, okay, right now we know that there are plastic or polymer synthetic fibers reaching the environment. We also know that natural fibers are reaching the environment as well. What we are lacking is very good quantification methods for fibers, robust and harmonized methods for determining concentrations in the environment. And then what we're really lacking is good enough data on impacts, so that we can actually conduct a risk assessment to determine, what the risk is and what concentrations might represent a risk in the environment. So I think that's the biggest knowledge gap from my perspective right now.
I mean, do you see, Andy, that there will be a point in the future where we can, you've done your research at the impact level and you can pass that back to textile scientists to really understand how we can maybe fine tune our textile research to be in specific areas where you're finding the greatest impact? Do you think that's something that longer term is possible?
Yeah, I think very much so. I mean, at least the work that we've been doing and in the wider community that I'm aware of, we are starting now to make sure that when we do toxicity, well, any studies, that we also, with synthetics, that we also include at least one natural fiber as a comparison, because just going out and testing polyester and nylon and whichever synthetic fibers and getting some data on, you know, how they behave in the environment and concentrations, or how toxic they might be and what's driving that toxicity. If you can't compare that to natural fibers, which are the main alternative, then I think that's really important. And I think it's also, just to sort of extend that slightly, I think when we look at this natural versus synthetic, I think it's really, really important that we start to bring in life cycle here, because, you know, naturals sound great, but a lot of people gloss over the chemicals that are used. If it's, you know, crop, you're competing with agricultural crops that would be used for food potentially. You've got to grow livestock in the case of wool or leather. There's all sorts of things that, you know, so the CO2 emissions, this chemical use in natural products as well. And I think it needs to be more balanced when we assess these things.
Great, thanks, Andy. And last but not least here is, you know, maybe Sandra, you can help us bridge those two areas. I mean, you came from a research background, you're now in a brand. And, you know, can you identify here where the opportunities are of bringing this textile research and environmental research close together, or areas of really kind of robust research that need to be undertaken to enable you as a brand to make the biggest difference you possibly can?
I think that Andy and Alice, you covered it so well. So I was thinking, is there something I disagree on or something else? But I think, I mean, bringing it together, like knowing what fibers are leaving the garments where, like from the edges, or are they leaving from the surface, or is it only dust because, you know, it was a dusty floor, so the polyester has collected all the, I mean, we found when we looked at what type of fibers we had, we found glass, we found humus, we found metals, everything. So it was definitely not only textile fibers that shed from our test fabrics, but like what are the mitigation potential? What leaves the garment and why? And also in the production, I mean, Alice already covered that. And to see where do we find the most harm, the most potential for damage. So the only thing I think we should focus on more is that these measuring methods that build on weighting the amount of shed fibers when we look at fiber or fabric shedding. I think there's a risk if we only weigh the shed material. We will have metals, we will have glass, we will have detergents, perhaps, and softeners and things that leave the garment. So I think that it's important that we also develop microscopy methods so that we can see what type of material is actually leaving the garment, and then track back the origin of that.
Yeah, great point there. And I think what we need to do there is make sure that that input goes into the measurement topic in the summit. And, you know, it wasn't actually brought up in the December webinar, but we can definitely take that point back and make sure that that is taken into the conversation there. So great points. At this point, I just want to maybe move to Lisa and Trudy and see if there's any further comments from the participants, or if we can maybe post a question back to the delegates.
We've already posted the question, so we were getting some comments coming through as you were all talking. A few actually talking around the toxicology side, so wondering whether there's any research being done on those chemicals and how they affect microorganisms when they're shed, as well as are there ways that we can look at, are we looking at the right thing? Is it the fibers themselves that are causing that versus the actual chemical itself, the fact that it's shedding?
Yeah, and that's great actually, because that also marries up with the conversation in our last webinar. So in December, when we were focused on measurement and we kind of asked, you know, what was coming through for people, there was a lot of conversation around air, biodegradability, toxicology. So it's really good to see those kind of similarities of thoughts coming back from people.
Yeah, bio-based polyester was also a couple of ones, some desires for thoughts around whether that's a good thing or bad thing. Yeah.
Great. So I think these are all areas we can go into in more depth, but it's really good to hear that the consistency of conversation coming through. So when we actually plan our roundtables and we plan the discussions that are going to be supporting the roadmap, we can bring that in. So real good value there.
Oh, can I just ask Sophie, is the plan to address some of these questions today, or are they all going to move to the summit?
What I would like to do, just in the essence of time today was intended as a kind of a pre-event conversation to kind of get it kick-started. I'd really like to take these into the depth that's required in the summit, unless there's anything pressing that we can answer quickly today. Just mindful that there's some other areas we want to get to, but if there's anything you want to jump in on there, Andy, yeah, please do. But we would love to see everybody at the summit. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
The one thing I'd just like to pick up, there's two questions that were aimed at me, and I probably haven't got time to go into a big explanation, but the first one was, Andy, what's your view on bio-based polyester? And the other one was, Andy, what's your opinion on biodegradable polyester? And I think this is something that we really, in the community, we need to sort of grab a little bit and be clear about our definitions, because that's two very different things potentially. So a bio-based polyester is still polyester, and it can come from, but it just is derived from like a plant-based carbon source rather than crude oil. Whereas biodegradable is, I'm not even sure if it's possible to have biodegradable polyester, actually, is it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yes, I mean, for example, PLA is a polyester.
The polyester, okay.
Biodegradable, yeah.
So in which case then, but biodegradable is something very different to bio-based. And I think the answers to those two questions are very different, but maybe we wait for the summit for that.
Maybe I can join in for a moment to add to this discussion, if you allow me.
Yes, just if it's quick, we can, and before we move on.
For sure, most of the biopolymers that are decadable are polyesters, are from the family of polyester. So it is actually very good possible to think about the possibility to use biodegradable polyesters for this application. And even you can take it one step further and consider the possibility to use for garments polyesters that are marine degradable, so will not pollute the environment at all. It should not be PLA. PLA is only compostable and not degradable at all. But there are a lot of possibilities to think about solutions in the direction of the use of biodegradable polymers for garments.
I think this is a very complex area that I think maybe today we don't have the time to go into.
No, I don't think so. But maybe it is an issue that can come up with the summit, and we are eager to contribute in that area because we are really specialists in that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your comment there. Okay, so moving on then, emerging areas of research. I mean, maybe to all the panel in no particular order, but top three areas that you feel in the kind of medium to long term. So anything that hasn't been covered so far. It sounds like we've covered most of them, I think, already, but if there's anything else, or even from the delegates in today's call.
I can jump in with one. I think we kind of mentioned it sort of in a roundabout kind of way, but I think pathways of transport, I think, is really, really good to have a focus on. So atmospheric transport or air transport as a route. Are we focusing any sort of capture efforts or technologies in the right places when it comes to fibre, capturing fibres or trying to reduce release into the environment? A lot of the research has been pointed out. There's this sort of link to the marine environment, and everyone kind of associates plastic pollution with the marine environment, and that's just an artifact of where the first papers came from. Really, I mean, we subsequently finding out it's everywhere. It's in terrestrial environments, it's in the atmosphere, we're getting long range transport to the Arctic areas, and we're not totally sure of all the transport mechanisms. So I think that's interesting.
Okay then.
And I would, of course, like to add the environmental systems analysis and life cycle assessment aspects of it. because I think that we need to see where do we have the most effects, and compare different sources of microplastics and their effects. And also, as Alice, you mentioned the production, and I mean, I saw in the chat someone talked about lung problems, and for me it's kind of a bit provoking that we have had a dusty environment for the workers in the production countries for so long and never cared about it. And now we see that when we have dusty environments here in the consumption countries, we can call ourselves, then we start to see that as a problem with airborne microplastics. I think that's the concentration in a factory can be very high compared to the concentration in an average Swedish home.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I think you brought up a very valid point there, Sandra. You know, I was in a conversation earlier on this week, and they were talking about, you know, is there a life cycle approach, you know, a type of approach to this? You know, we talk about in certain areas putting filters onto washing machines. You know, what is the environmental impact of putting extra plastic into a washing machine? Can you actually save them that amount of plastic, for example, through capture method from the, you know, the fibers that are coming out of the textiles? So there's a lot of knock-on, you know, implications of some of these proposals that people are making, or not even proposals, actual technologies that are coming through. So yeah, you know, looking at this from the whole 360-degree angle, I think is going to be vitally important. So maybe, I don't know if another question has been posted back to the delegates here. I think, you know, we were asking the delegates where in the life cycle of a textile product is it most important to focus research and mitigation actions. I don't know if anybody, I mean, we've got quite a lot of participants on the call today, if there's any key areas or trends that are coming through.
And we've just posted that question, and I think there was a lot coming through on some of the other sides there, still with a lot around the biodegradable and what exactly is happening with that, and different test methods, and what truly is left over. So we can keep you updated on new ones.
Yeah, great. Sorry, I was running ahead of myself there. Okay, so bridging academic and brand-based needs. You know, it's great on the panel today. We've got that, you know, one side we've got very deep academic research, and then also we've got the needs of a brand. How do we actually bridge those two areas together? Because I think where I'm coming from here is we need to make the biggest environmental impacts. And I think we can do that through the lens of brands and retailers together with their supply chain partners. And where do you see the opportunities for taking research with regards to making sure one supports the other? And again, a question to anybody really on the panel today, if you've got any strong ideas of how we can see that happening.
I don't know who should answer. I think that, I mean, this cross-disciplinary dialogue, it's so important, so that that we really spend the research funding and our working hours and everything on questions that are relevant and possible to do something about. So it must be something that actually improves the environment, that, as you say, but also so that we can have a good policy development and not come to any pre or too early policy developments. I mean, we have had examples in Sweden where in public procurement people have wanted to be like proactive and environmentally friendly and everything, and then they put criteria for microplastics from textiles when we really don't even know. We need to do much more research before we can put any requirements in procurement business. So yeah, I think this sort of informing the industry about what we actually know, what is scientific information, and what is more driven by emotions, and at the same time seeing to that the research is relevant. I think that's always important, but in this alarmistic topic, I think it's more important than ever.
I mean, I think one thing that, concerns me perhaps a little bit about this is, on one side, we're getting very, very detailed understanding about very specific areas of textile production, or, a certain element of that textile. And what we need to ensure is that as we're translating that to the brand level, it can be executed by the manufacturing partners. It might be that a machine cannot be modified to do something in a certain way that we know is beneficial with regards to lessening fibre fragmentation and loss. So I think, this is where I see that there's a lot of opportunities of bringing the needs of a brand and retailer together with the areas of expertise of academic research. Because what we would hate to see, I suppose, in the future is, we've got some great academic research, but actually the suppliers come back and say, well, actually my factory is not set up to make those sorts of modifications at a commercial level. So I think we've got a lot of opportunity with regards to conversation at that level to make sure that we're kind of aligning everything to maximise as much as we possibly can. So I think that's a really exciting area.
Can I just jump in on this sort of question of bridging the academic and brand research gap? And I think one of the things that I've sort of seen generally, and this picks up on this biodegradability and bio-based materials as possible solutions to address one particular issue. So bio-based to address climate, more biodegradability to address more build-up of plastic particles in the environment. Is that I think what you have, we're missing a sort of group in the middle, which are the sort of the technology developers, these new developers of these technologies. So you have, and that is partly research based, but what I see a lot of is that small companies will come, they'll develop a product, and then they will not necessarily be entirely clear about all the benefits or negative sides of their product. And I think that can be misleading for big companies who are looking to buy into new materials. I get asked quite frequently about this issue of biodegradability. How do we know if it's biodegradable? Is it really worth us buying this? Will it work? Will it not work? And the companies that are selling these technology solutions are not really backing up their product with any clear evidence. And I'm starting to see more and more that they are often themselves a sort of a middle company. They're buying a product and repackaging it for use in a particular market. And I think this picks up on a comment that somebody made in here, but I think this is where we can start to bridge this, is like having an openness and having a need for proven effectiveness of technologies and backed up by good scientific data.
Yeah, I think definitely something to add to the roadmap to make sure that we cover that. Judy, just wanting to go back, you said that you'd only just posted the questions, wondering if anything is coming back from people on the call today.
Yeah, we've had a couple of bits come in actually, looking around, and perhaps it talks a bit to what Andy was just saying, but what's the balance between, taking action early on a perceived risk versus having that evidence-based and doing a lot of research? How do you sort of make that decision in terms of when to start, and long-term impact, obviously, going forward? There's another point here as well. The media's already decided that plastic is bad and natural is good. And whilst the research needs to be done properly, we need to get on with some factual data. Otherwise, it might come too late.
Yeah.
I think that's such a big issue right now. And if you're a company that makes a natural fibre product, it's very easy to get onto the market, and you don't have to say anything about, all of the sort of the carbon footprint of your material, the ethics side of it, maybe that you're taking away cropland in a country because it's more financially beneficial to grow materials for clothing or whatever. We're just using clothing, but the argument is applicable across all sorts of different consumer products. So, CO2 emissions, carbon footprints, I think it's really, really important that this is much more balanced going forward.
And I think, up until this point, a lot of the focus has been around domestic washing and loss through water. And I think as we start to, expand the agenda, look outside of that scope, then I think, synthetics versus natural, I think the conversation is going to change quite considerably. And we need to make sure we're kind of set up for success when that happens. Okay, just thinking a couple of points ago that there was a talk about suppliers and manufacturing partners. It would be quite interesting for us, anybody on the line today that is from a manufacturing partner or supplier, maybe you could just pop it into the chat so we just get a feel for the split in today's call between brands, retailers, suppliers. So if you want to just pop in, what sort of business you come from, that would also be helpful for us. So what I want to do now is move to funding, a topic that people don't like talking about. Really, we want to make sure that we're not just doing an impact roadmap, but we have actually got the infrastructure behind it to financially support it. And we want to make sure that we get the right people at the summit to support those parts of the conversation, and also to see for themselves the importance of this work and the importance of working collaboratively across the industry. So it would be good to hear both from the panel and also the participants on the call, your suggestions for people that you feel should be listening to this dialogue and also be part of formulating that roadmap. So if there's any ideas, we've obviously got invites going out to various people, but it'd be good to make sure that we're capturing all your contacts and people as well, because I'd hate to see this roadmap put together and not have the funding to support the actions that are required. And this is where it all goes quiet.
I've always got something to say, Sophie. So
thanks, Andy.
Maybe I can kick this off a little bit. As a research institute, we have a range of projects that are ranging from totally industry funded all the way through to fully public money funded. So Research Council in Norway, where we're based, or EU funding. And then it's a spectrum of everything in between. So even the Norwegian Research Council, it has different grades of project types, where some are 100% financed by the Research Council, where they see that there's certain topics that are relevant, where there should be industry involved. They will ask for projects where there's 20% industry support. And that can be in the way of, rather than money up front, it can be participation and action in a project, up to direct funding. So there's lots of different mechanisms here, I think, and most likely it's going to be a combination of all of them going forward.
But who ultimately needs to have the responsibility for funding this? Sometimes I get NGOs talking about, it needs to be the brands and retailers' responsibility. And then I've got other people saying it needs to be the research councils, or it needs to be, government money. Is there any kind of areas that we particularly need to identify as being responsible for this, or is this a joint responsibility across a number of different areas? Yeah, and I see you nodding there. So, that's my feeling. I think it needs to be something that is managed across the network and the collaborative forum. Really, I think everybody needs to play a part in bringing funds forwards to support this. Does anybody think any other way? Sorry, Andy. Yeah,
I was going to say, I think it's it depends on the part of the broader question that is of interest. So and I think, but also I think it's how you perceive different groups as stakeholders in the problem. So of course it's very easy to point at the industry. I'm used to this. We've done a huge amount of work with the oil and gas industry, which is an industry that is massively important globally, but is also one that has been responsible for all sorts of environmental issues over the years. And it's very interesting to see, to look at that as a sort of example of where research, how different types of research is done. So again, like I was saying before, there's a full spectrum of from industry to public funded projects. Often industry combined together, so it's not one particular member or brand or company that is seemingly taking responsibility. And I think these sort of joint industry type organizations or actions can be quite beneficial for sort of spreading the costs and for having access for less costs to data that you need. So that's a nice way to go.
Great.
Yes, I agree with Andy. I mean, that different types of research should be covered by different funders, of course. So we have these TRL levels, technology readiness levels. And of course, if it comes to solutions, implementing them, then the industry must do some work in order to actually implement them. And the in-kind work is vital for the project to get results out in practice. And then, of course, for the lower TRL levels, and I mean, toxicity studies, environmental monitoring, for example, that's maybe for the public funding. And I would really stress, I mean, I think it's so important that we have this type of governmental long sight funding for environmental monitoring, because now we discovered microplastics, and they have been in our environment at least 35 years. But what will the next thing be? So this sort of continuous monitoring, I mean, that has to be governmental money.
Question to you here, Sandra, is, you know, for a lot of these, it's kind of invisible until it becomes, you know, right over the newspapers. How do we attract the attention of the relevant funders ahead of time, so we have got the time to do the research that we require before it becomes this, you know, emergency that everything needs to be done yesterday? You know, because it's always going to be an invisible issue until the headline news, and I think that's the challenge in this. And I don't know if anybody's got any answers, but I just want to
I wonder, do you think I had the answer to that one?
No, I mean, we've got 80 people on the call. Maybe there's somebody on the line today that has got any suggestions as well. But yeah, Andy.
We were drafting a paper last year. It was more on social science side and governance. I've got a colleague she works a lot with environmental pollution scenarios over the last few decades, and we sort of mapped plastic against some of the big environmental challenges that have come up. So that included the hole in the ozone layer, acid rain, you know, and of course, like you pointed out, the problems identified, everyone sort of panics and expects it to be solved in the next 5 minutes. And of course, it doesn't work that way. The science is always playing catch up to the media and the needs of society and industry. But I think what's really, you have to take each environmental challenge in a different way, because some are easier to solve than others. So the ozone, that was relatively easy to solve. And as soon as you have a mass of countries that support and take action together to address a problem, then you can often quickly overcome it. And we're starting to see the ozone layer is repairing itself nicely, and so on. Similarly with acid rain, for a time it was perceived as a regional issue for a long time. And it was only when, I can't remember the full details now, but it was only when Germany switched from not being too proactive about it to suddenly identifying that it was damaging their forests and that they were one of the big sources of acid rain themselves, then that was enough weight to drive mitigation actions. So it is very sort of case specific. And of course, the challenge with fibers is that we need clothing, we need textiles, and it's not like there's an easy replacement here, or we can just develop a new chemical in the next couple of years and everything's solved. I don't think it'll ever be like that. We certainly can't ban fibers, you know, in the same way that we could ban CFCs, or at least find replacements. So, you know, I think we have to assess the situation as on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Just wanting to take a pause there and see if there's any conversation coming through from the people on the call today.
I was like,
I'm just smiling at the comment from Heather in Portland.
Yeah, Heather said she had acid rain where she grew up. There was a rayon production plant in the next town over.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I remember talking to her a little bit on that. Yeah, nothing as such has actually come up within that funding discussion. I am curious though, if you each had like a pot of money that you could put in one place to fund, to get sort of like some, you know, cross industry action happening, where would you actually put your pot of money?
Yeah, that would be a really good one to understand. And I think it's going to come down to that. When we've got all the ideas put forwards through the roundtables, we are looking at a kind of scoring criteria as to the ones that we feel collectively are going to, you know, get off the ground first. And so to hear what your thoughts are, I think it's going to be really, really good there. Yeah, really, really good conversation there. Thanks, everybody, for your comments on that one. And we've just got a few minutes left, and I just want to wrap up by asking all the panelists today, and also the participants on the call, where you see, or you know, what you would deem as success from the summit. You know, we openly invite you all to come and join us and be part of developing that roadmap. So therefore, it supports you and your businesses. But what would you say that, you know, summit success looks like, and how can we help you achieve that?
Yeah, I can start on that. I think from my point of view, I mean, we've mentioned it quite a lot throughout this conversation, but I think collaboration across, you know, all of the different disciplines involved in this is going to be really important to progress the research ultimately. So I think making connections across those different areas and having the summit there to provide that platform is going to be really interesting. Hopefully there'll be some really good discussions coming out of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alice. Yeah, Andy.
I'd like to see a white paper coming out that clarifies, it doesn't have to be a very long paper, that clarifies some of this ambiguity and uncertainty around a lot of the terms that are being used, and that actually sort of highlights things to avoid, research areas at different levels, and maybe mapped out what would be more appropriate for public funding, what might be more appropriate for industry to fund, but to really help the industry to sort of be able to make better decisions already based on the knowledge that we have, because I think that's a big challenge. When you sort of look into the market, it's crazy, and everyone's trying to sell you a product or a material that is going to make your product better or less impactful on the environment. And you know, so factoring in things like this, biodegradability, biobased, you know, just so that people have got a reference point that we all agree on, I think could be at least a snapshot right now. Excuse me. I think that would be very beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah, great idea with the white paper. I have written down a consensus view on what the knowledge gap is. I mean, that's the same thing. I mean, having it written down too. And also perhaps some sort of playbook, like what is best practice right now. Because at Kappahl, I do believe that the toxicity part is the dominating damage driver. So what we sort of, our mitigation project, we also have a lot of natural fibers, just kidding. But our mitigation project is to see to that our chemistry work really means that we phase out the damaging chemicals that we are aware of, and we have this program to see that the suppliers really follows this, because that feels as the most sensible thing to do right now. But is it? I mean, so if we could have some sort of consensus on best practice too, until we have evaluated these things that you talk about, Sophie, that should we really create the environmental impact of filters or washing bags, laundry bags? Maybe there's more impact from the laundry bag than actual emissions of microplastics. So until we know, I from my point of view, I think reducing toxicity is definitely the best thing to do.
If we understand the toxicity.
Yeah, but the known toxicity.
Just in a couple of minutes we've got left. Trudy, is there any comments that we need to raise from? Nope.
There's comments. Sorry, I'm like struggling to keep up a little bit. So comments around new washing machines having filters, a concrete action could be to ask producers and brands either to immediately begin reductions in emissions or areas that need research funding, as we don't have enough guidance and we're behind what was set out at the Santa Barbara Original Summit. Start of introduction of science to challenge the perception that polyester is the most evil textile in the world.
Okay, great. So I just want to finish up by thanking everybody on our panel today, to Sandra, to Andy and to Alice, who all have been super supportive. It's been really interesting to hear your thoughts around this. And I know you're going to be joining us at the summit as well. And also to Lisa and Trudy for helping pull together your comments and thoughts so we can bring those into the conversation. There's still time to pop your comments and thoughts into the chat. We will be looking at all of it as we go into the final few weeks preparation. But at this point, I just want to thank you all for taking time to join us today and to invite you to sign up and come along to get into the depth and the nuts and bolts of how we're going to pull this roadmap together to support you guys as so yeah, love to have you participate in that roadmap.
I just have to say that I've been really struggling not to jump in on all these questions and comments in the chat right now, but I'm really excited about discussing it. It's been hard not to go, but there's so much of interest here to discuss in much more detail at the summit. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, great. And I can't see them, so I'm looking forward to having a look at all the comments when we finish up today. So thank you all. And yeah, I think our contact details, oops, sorry, last slide. Our contact details are on the bottom there, microfibreconsortium.com. And if you want the summit information, please go to summit and we can help you there. So thank you very much.